With the vehicle safely raised and supported, go ahead and remove your rear wheel. 21mm socket. If the wheel is frozen, like this one is, go ahead and start one lug nut on, and with a large rubber mallet, go ahead and hit the back of the tire. That should pop it free. Then remove the lug nut that you installed for safety, and remove the wheel. With a 17mm, go ahead and remove the two caliper, two bracket bolts. These are also the slide pins, and I guess in this case they're pretty dried up and almost seized. These are going to have to get cleaned up really well. And now gently remove your caliper and set it aside. This brake hose situation here is a little weird because it kind of loops around, but if you twist it, you can put it right here on the axle. Next, remove your brake pads. Sometimes they're a little stuck in here. And with the same 17mm, remove the two caliper bracket mounting bolts. Leave this one on just a little bit. Okay, and remove the caliper bracket. The next challenge is going to be to remove the rotor, and of course it's stuck on the hub here. I've already sprayed it with rust penetrant in every one of these holes, as well as around the studs and the hub. So I'm just going to take a hammer and hammer it. Obviously this rotor is not being reused, so I can hammer anywhere. That moved. There we go. With a collection bucket right underneath, I'm going to spray this whole area with brake clean so I can get rid of the dust, but also clean it. Obviously these brake shoes are really poor condition and they need to be replaced, but for this video I'm going to focus on just the brake pads and rotors. Next with the wire brush, you want to clean up this hub area, make sure it's nice and flat, free of any rust or debris. And rinse it down. Once it's dried up, I want to add some anti-seize to the hub area. That's going to prevent the rotor from sticking in the future. Of course, you want to try to avoid the studs, so if you have the brushed kind, that's better. I'm going to take all these to the wire wheel. I'm going to clean up the threads on the caliper bracket bolts, and then I'm going to clean up the threads and the sliders on the caliper 2 bracket bolts. With all these bolts nicely cleaned up, and for these, by the way, you want to pay special attention to this lip right there below the threads. You want to clean that up because that's where the boot seals up. If that has rust on it, water's going to make its way in and rust the whole pin out. So moving along to the caliper bracket, go ahead and remove the hardware off of it. These anti-rattle clips are trash now. As you can see, they are extremely rotted. If they're in decent condition, these can be just wire brushed and reused, but either way your kit should come with some, so I would just put new ones on. And next you want to wire brush these areas and make sure they are very clean. It's important because otherwise the hardware won't sit right, and if it doesn't sit right, it'll crush the pads, and if the pads get squeezed top and bottom, they won't slide properly. This one's pretty clean, but this one has some rust chunks in it, so make sure you get those out one way or another. You can use a screwdriver or some sort of a scraping tool and just scrape all the rust flakes off of here. Okay, clean it up. While these are drying, you want to clean out the holes where the pins go. It's easiest to do it with a bore brush, but if you don't have one, just fill it with parts cleaner and just twirl it around. Agitate it somehow. You can use a very small screwdriver. Just be very gentle. Just don't shove a rag in there because that's just going to get stuck. And dump it out. Rinse it. And do the same to the other side. Now, because these slide pins also fasten the caliper onto the bracket, I'm not going to lubricate them yet. I'm going to wait until they're ready to go in, otherwise it's just going to make a mess all over. So at this point, go ahead and put a little bit of caliper grease on the areas that you cleaned up, right where the anti-rattle clips ride. That's going to prevent rust in the future. You don't need a lot of grease on here, just a light coating to prevent rust. Once it's greased, find your anti-rattle clip. You want to make sure that you put it with these tabs facing out, not inwards, otherwise it'll hit the rotor. Press these down into their area here. Sometimes they'll require a little bit of persuading. Okay, just do the same to all four. Next, go ahead and install your rotor. If you have the non-coated ones, you want to make sure you spray them down with some brake parts cleaner and clean up all the oils. Once you put it on, double check your parking brake shoe adjustment. Mine actually feels fine. I feel a tiny bit of drag, but it's not actually slowing down the wheel, so that's perfect. If you do feel any drag, there's a little star wheel down there. You can spin it either clockwise or counterclockwise, and that'll either expand or contract the shoes, which will adjust this. Next step is to install the caliper bracket. Snug it up, and then I'll torque it. Torque these two bolts to 65 foot-pounds. Next, go ahead and put in your brake pads. All right, make sure they're not seized in here and that they slide around properly, otherwise they'll just grip onto the brakes and you'll have braking issues. Next, it's time to compress the caliper. I'm going to use a tool that looks like this. They make different versions of it, but basically you want to use something that'll compress the piston evenly and slowly. There you go. If the piston does not want to go back and it's fighting you, that means it's seized and you need a new caliper. Next, go ahead and put a little bit of grease on the caliper piston right here, where it makes contact with the pads, as well as on these two ears here. This is going to help the brakes operate quietly and smoothly. And slide the caliper over the bracket. Make sure your boots don't get caught. Go ahead and lubricate your caliper slide pins. Make sure it's got plenty of grease on there, both of them. Make sure you also lubricate right here in that lip where the boot sits. Just try not to get it too much on the threads. And insert the slide pins. Go ahead and bottom them out. And torque these to 65 foot-pounds as well. At this point, you can go ahead and do the other side the same exact way, and then pump up your brakes, and let's get the wheel on. Go ahead and put the wheel back on. Start on all of your lug nuts, snug them down, and then I'll torque them to 83 foot-pounds.